Our final session of the day, we've gone to the final session of the day, gets to the core mission of this conference, creating a blueprint for how all of us in the news business can transform our coverage of the climate crisis and its solutions. When we say climate change is everything, we truly mean everything. That includes interrogating our own work in the face of the climate emergency. Over the break, our facilitators, along with people from the Climate Beacon newsrooms, have drawn out some key themes. You'll see them up on the slide during the town hall as we dig deeper into these themes and add anything that you think is actually missing with them. To facilitate that discussion, please welcome Mekdela Maskal, Engagement Director for Covering Climate Now, and Angela K. Evans, who's a Climate Network Manager for Solutions Journalism Network. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying to the end. You're the real ones. Really excited to get this conversation kicked off, and have been really impressed by how participatory you all have been in joining us and writing down your insights and questions on these flip charts around the room.
Yeah, so as you've been hearing all day, this is a participatory conference. We've taken some models of other participatory conferences to engage all of you and make sure that this isn't just a conversation of the great panelists and speakers that we've had on stage, but it's actually reflective of what you're seeing in your communities, the challenges that you're facing in your newsrooms, in your news organizations, if you're a freelancer, to people you're pitching, and really make these blueprints for media transformation reflective of all of our needs. And so with that, I wanted to bring up the community agreements that we discussed earlier. And as we go, we're going to be walking around. We're going to be having mics around for you all to contribute. I just wanted to take a moment and have everyone read this, and then also ask, is there anything missing? Is there anything that as we start talking as a community of journalists, as a community of practice around climate and solutions, is there anything missing that we all want to just agree to as it guides our dialogue? We have someone in the back, if we can get her a mic.
Camille was great at 9 Millones and really articulating trauma as part of this conversation. And I think, especially for communities of color and marginalized communities, especially in the Global South, I do think we need to center that more in our conversation, because how we move forward and the term resiliency has been politicized and battered around from a white patriarchal place that I do really think we need to define the impact of the trauma and how we can move forward together in addressing that better.
Great, thanks, Farah. We are going to have folks stationed at the different flip charts to write your ideas down. So as we have encouraged you to write and use the flip charts all day, we will have people during this time to write that down. So we have that. Anything else we want to add to this list of agreements? So recognizing trauma. We have one right here.
I'm wondering if the voice of the climate change scientists is being heard enough as the climate is changing and what they are going through. Not just it's beyond the data. If whatever they're going through is also being talked about and written about.
The experience of climate scientists. Okay, any other agreements of just codes of conduct before we move into some more specific topics? Yeah.
Maybe an idea, but in sharing ideas and in taking space and making space, when questions are posed, maybe stop, don't rush to answer. Take 5-10 seconds, just think about it a little longer. I find that everybody comes to a more thoughtful thought than their first thought.
Yeah, that's a great one. So take some time to reflect before answering or speaking or defending your comment maybe. Yep, and one in the back, and then we'll kind of get this town hall going.
So many climate issues are covered on a national lens with that kind of a broad focus. Really think about the way you're covering climate. Would you want it covered that way in your community?
Yeah, more community focus. That's great. That's a good topic that we can discuss in the town hall. So I just wanted to set the scene with these agreements that this is how we're going to interact and discuss and talk about how we move forward as an industry when it comes to climate.
And now let's turn to the conversation. So as I said earlier, you all have been helping us get here by asking questions and writing down your questions on the flip charts around the room, or insights that have come up throughout the program, getting us ready for now, where Angela and I have looked around the room at some of the insights that have been written up and deciphered what some key themes have been that have arisen out of that. And so these are some of them, but it's not all inclusive or holistic, just some themes to get us started that we've seen bubble up often. Climate visuals and the important nature of visualizing climate in an accurate way. What is a real solution? Community engagement tactics, the power of local and ideas for local stories. How will we weave global context and colonialism in history into stories that are local or aren't necessarily as focused on the systems? How do we cover activism in ways that are more nuanced and less only about protest? Funding strategies. So the last conversation was all about fossil fuels and advertising, philanthropy. How are we going to fund the journalism that we want to do? And collaborations, editorial collaborations. So that's just some of the examples to get the conversation started, but everything is on the table. And also, I just want to encourage the folks writing around the room to use a new page, if you'd like, and stick the page that was full up on the wall. And if anyone wants to write themselves, please go up and write something down if you don't want to speak. Sometimes we're not as comfortable speaking into an audience, so you don't need to if you don't want to. Yeah. Anything you'd add?
No, I think one thing I really just do want to make sure is that you all know what we're going to do with this, right? It's really easy to sit here in a big room of people and talk and throw these ideas out there and write them on flip charts. But what are we actually going to do with this? Tomorrow, you saw on the schedule, we are going to have working groups. Those working groups have not been determined yet. I think we're starting to get an idea of what some of them are based on this, based on those of you who filled in the survey and gave us your responses that way. But that's what this next hour is about, is really coalescing around some of these big topics so that we can determine our working groups for tomorrow. And then again, what is the working group actually for, right? Because again, that's just going to be a discussion in small groups. You get to choose where you go. You get to choose which conversations you want to be a part of. We'll have facilitators at each table. But that doesn't stop tomorrow. You notice one of our agreements was when we think we're finished, we've really just begun. We are prepped as organizers to create blueprints for media transformation. Our organizations are going to work together in the coming months to actually produce something. Will it be definitive? Probably not, right? Will it be stagnant? Absolutely not. I think it's always going to need to be changing and updating, just as we see our industry changing, as we see the state of the crisis changing, as we see our communities experiencing that in different ways. But we do want you all to know that your contributions in this dialogue, in this conversation, are going somewhere. And there is opportunity after this conference to continue and participate. If you really are engaged in this idea of creating more blueprints for how we move forward, we will have online convenings and ways to continue to contribute this before we release the report or whatever it ends up being, the final product. So it doesn't end here this afternoon or even tomorrow. Awesome. So with that, I will start with the first question. What did you hear today that really resonated with you? Maybe it was something new. Maybe it was something that you knew but you heard from on stage. What's something that you heard that is really key in how you want to do your work or how you already do your work? I have someone in the back. Oh, yeah, right here. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. Samantha Shalit from Impact Edition magazine in Miami. And we focus on storytelling telling the stories of local change makers who are creating long-term solutions, not just Band-Aid solutions. And we've teamed up with photographers and designers to create really beautiful, creative storytelling channels that it goes beyond social and brings people in person and get the community talking with the people that we feature. And I've met a few really great journalists nearby who are using photography as well and trying to get more creative with the storytelling and less so traditional journalism. And I think that's something we need to talk about more, is how do we bring in other disciplines that are not just journalists but creators to tell the stories for different communities and make it resonate in their language.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think we see that in the visual, right? Yeah, climate visuals. We also saw that in the last presentation with that amazing visualization of the buildings going into the atmosphere. Awesome. Yep, right here.
So one thing that really resonated with me was early in the conversation, someone quoted somebody else and said, scientists are more sure about climate change than they are about smoking causing cancer. And that resonated with me because I work at a very local paper, and sometimes I forget, especially when I'm in a room like this, that not everyone thinks about climate all the time the way I do. And so finding those ways to quickly explain to people who are not thinking about this often and who have maybe internalized this dialogue that, like, this is kind of up in the air, and some people say yes and some people say no, and I haven't really thought about it since. And how do we communicate in a way that isn't condescending and isn't looking down on people and is making use of their lived experience to connect to what we're thinking about. So that quote really captured some of what I've been wrestling with on that.
Yeah, so important, I think, to listen to the communities that you're trying to serve and mirror the ways that they're understanding information that's important to them, for sure.
Yeah, and that climate literacy, right? That we understand climate science and can translate that effectively. I did want to mention too, in the comment about climate scientists and what they're experiencing as well, we do have our breakfast tomorrow will have climate scientists from the Columbia Climate School, Climate School, and they'll be here to have breakfast with us. So it's a really great chance to build your sources around scientists, people who are really studying this, and make that connection between scientists and journalists in a more effective way. All right, right here.
Hi, my name is Iris. One thing that I think that really stuck out to me was actually the first panel talking about the state of journalism issuing a call to action. And I just really appreciated the voices of Sherelle and Amaya and Damien on just like collaboration. I think often for myself as an editor, and I'm actually someone who's going to be going into government with the EPA on Monday, really thinking about environmental justice, and I'm going to continue that work, but just the collaboration, I think, between newsrooms or, newsrooms in government or newsrooms in academia, I think is something that we definitely need more of, and holding spaces like this, I think, is important to have more collaboration. So I don't know, I was struck by the first panel a lot with just the AP investing in collaboration, and Center for Investigative Journalism in Puerto Rico really putting impacted communities and voices first and having the foresight to do that. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we take for granted things that journalists need to relearn around collaboration. I think we're trained to be first to the story, and maybe climate is a story that's different and we should treat it differently. And collaboration might be more important than breaking news. Yeah. You want to go to the back of the room? Yeah.
Yep. I'm Ethan with Sweaty Penguin. Two quick things that stood out. One from our Zoom presentation about how climate action is a responsibility, but that doesn't make it a burden, and how to incorporate that into our reporting to show how solutions are not necessarily sacrifices, but opportunities. The other was about reaching young people, which came up, I think, very briefly, and I think it would be great to talk about it more, because in talking about how to reach specific communities, young people is a big community, but it is a community very much affected by climate change, and I think there are opportunities there as to how we can do that.
Hey, I'm Katie from Weather Channel. The entire panel talking about climate justice definitely resonated with me, especially talking about like disaster math. But one thing was the through line throughout it all was how do you like put more empathy into your storytelling? And Ezra was saying, which I think about a lot, especially like as a white woman covering stories about communities of color, and how do you go the extra step to find experts that might be from those communities, and like a 10-minute like extra Google. It's like not that hard, and it's so valuable, especially when you're trying to carry that empathy into your storytelling. Yeah, I just loved it. It was great.
All right, let's take one more on this. Go ahead, Anna.
I'm Justin Cook. I'm a photographer and journalist, freelance based out of Durham, North Carolina. And I have really enjoyed this conference so far. I particularly enjoyed the first panel, especially the comments about how, empowering local communities to tell local stories in their own backyard. But we're at one of the most prestigious journalism schools in the country, deciding on a blueprint for climate journalism, and there is not one visual journalist on any of these panels. And I'm wondering why.
That's a great question, Justin, and I think it's an oversight, if I'm honest, and I can't answer for everybody and all the organizers. But I do think that's so important that it has come up so much, and it's definitely going to be a topic of conversation in our working group and in the blueprint moving forward, because we've heard from several of you how important it is.
I do also want to center that, our TV journalists are visual journalists as well. And I think that they, although they're not, so you're talking about photographers, and I take that wholeheartedly, yeah.
We're actually contributing real reporting beyond our photography to like this climate narrative, and we're also we're inventing what this visual vocabulary for climate looks like, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah, hear you. Thank you.
Say that again. So we're on the front lines doing this work, like, and putting ourselves in danger and spending our own time and money, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. And it's like I worked in newsrooms for most of my life, and I feel like what I'm experiencing in these spaces is essentially these old newsroom battles where like word people decide the agenda, and then we're like sort of a service department to what y'all are doing, and that's not how good journalism is done. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, do you have a response to that, or is it something else? Yeah, go ahead, and then we will move on.
Well, just to build, I'm Caitlin, and I'm also a freelance visual journalist based here in New York. And one thing I think could be interesting to incorporate into the blueprint discussion is oftentimes, like, working with many different outlets, visuals get brought in at the end, like after there's so much research and stuff. And so, like, it would be really cool to, like, the model that AP has kind of done, where these editors are meeting from all of these different, it's like not just text and visual and video, and they're all on different schedules, but it's like this kind of integration. And like, I think bringing in the photographers like earlier, because we can help or point out, oh, hey, this thing is happening could be a really good like visual element in a story. So I think having that cross-sectional conversation in the blueprint could be really cool, like talking about unsiloing silos.
Yeah, and actually that takes me to the next question for all of you. What's missing? We obviously heard that visual journalists' voice and experience and expertise is missing earlier in the story. What else today did you not hear, or what's missing from the conversation so far?
Hi, I'm Jenny.
Keep your hands raised. We will, the mic runners will get to you. Sorry.
I'm Jenny Splitter from Sentient Media. I did hear other sectors beyond fossil fuels mentioned once, but yeah, like in general, there hasn't been anyone to talk about food sector emissions from animal agriculture, and land use especially. So I'd love that to be part of the blueprint.
All right, I have one right here.
I didn't hear any mention of the impact of climate change on any species other than human. In the stories I write, usually the editor wants me to write about the impact on the economy, and I think we need to expand this. This is a community of life, right? We're not just talking about anthropomorphic impacts. We're talking about this community of life that we live on this earth.
Yeah, and keeping that part of all climate reporting, not just to this environmental science beat or something like that from a science perspective. Yep, in the back.
Hi, so I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I just wanted to mention that documentary is a great way to learn about a topic. And then two, it would be great to have some conversations about nuclear, which is a complicated issue. So that's, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take one in the front?
Hi, my name is Betsy Rosenberg, and it's great to be here. Other than the freezing air conditioning, which is always on when we're at climate change conferences talking about this crisis, which drives me a little crazy. Haven't heard much about people who've been doing radio coverage. I have for 27 years, covering the Green Beat, 22 on the Climate Beat, and have a lot of stories to tell, as you might imagine, have pitched all the networks and given up. And we have started an online platform called greentv.com. And we are telling the truth, connecting dots, and relentlessly focusing on solutions, which has always been my motto. Had to leave CBS Radio after a career there to cover environmental news in 2007 and haven't looked back, and have pitched them, but they weren't interested until very recently, when I think Mother Nature just made it impossible to ignore. And it's wonderful that there are climate correspondents now, but it's still the tip of the melting iceberg. And if they want to see how much is going on, 4,500 interviews on my website. But it's not about me. What I really wanted to talk about was missing. I was just responding to the visual piece being missing, maybe the audio too, is the elephant in the room. And that's Fox, the fox in the room. We are not going to win. I guarantee it. I'll bet my life on it. I've already bet 27 years until we turn off the spigot, not only of fossil fuels, but of the toxic lies that continue on Fox. And I've been on Hannity's show and Tucker Carlson's show a lot of times, and they are as bad as you might imagine. I can't watch it, of course, but I have someone who does for me. And up to and including Tuesday night, and Tuesday we were out there in front of Fox, Truth Tuesdays, every week, every Fox station across the country. They protest the lies, especially the climate lies. We were out there, like to think that they heard us, but Sean Hannity, that night, the climate crisis is just a virtuous Trojan horse for global collectivism, whatever the heck that means. Now, we were shouting, Rupert Murdoch stepped down today, like to think they heard us, wish, wish, but Lachlan is just as bad. But quite seriously, how can they get away with lying about climate change when they're no longer allowed to lie about COVID, election fraud, and they're still doing it. And so we are filing a lawsuit. I guess I'm not a journalist anymore, because, and if I can just add this,
okay.
I think it's important, because anyone who would like to join us, class action suit, just for that reason. And it's killing people, because people who watch Fox will not evacuate soon enough because they don't know that it's climate changed weather, and it's not their mother's hurricane or their father's fire. And I have taken video of all these, horrendous disasters. The signature is, we didn't know. We've never seen anything like this. I'm sure that we could easily find 3 people who watch Fox and therefore didn't know to evacuate soon enough. So it has caused deaths.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing what you're saying is we need to have a discussion around how do we effectively address disinformation, misinformation, whether it's spread by the fossil fuel industry or within our own industry. Maya.
My question is, not my question, but my comment is actually related to that I wish we were talking more about how to speak to or with climate change deniers, and if there's any room to report, on them, about them, like she was saying, what should we be doing about this?
That's awesome. Anna, who's not, yeah.
Yeah, Sophie Hewitt from AFP again. I wanted to add something about visual coverage. I think it's extremely important to anticipate that visual coverage as a whole, I mean, between text, video, photo, people, because otherwise you end up covering heat waves with people eating ice cream. That's not what we want.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to stress is that you mentioned actually harassment against journalism. It was mentioned also mental health on the public, but also on journalists. I mean, this story is difficult to cover, and it has an impact on journalists' mental health. And I also wanted to, so we talked about training, and I think this is something important to add on training. And there is also, the safety of our teams that we're sending to cover disasters, which are more and more important and numerous disasters. So it's also important to provide that training. Just you're not covering fires, you're not covering floods as any other event. So this is something important to add to our blueprint.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Karen?
Hi, thank you. Do you want me to hold it? Oh, okay, thanks. My name is Augusta McDonald. I am a local TV reporter from KTVQ in Billings, Montana. And just to kind of add on a little bit to sort of the missing mediums represented in the experts on the stage, you have power of local, but specifically power of local TV, I think is really important to be included in this blueprint as it's developed. There's been lots of conversation today that's touched on the value of local news people, both in terms of, they're recognizable, they're credible because they're familiar and relatable to a local audience. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people go to their local TV station that they watched for 20, 30 years, or their mom and dad watched, and that credibility is something that it really takes decades to build. So I guess as part of the blueprint, I sort of have three thoughts in mind to engage with, including local television. One, engaging with kind of the powers that be, which would be the main media companies that own all of the local stations in the United States, like Scripps, Tegna, Sinclair, Gray. I was kind of surprised that none of them were represented, none of their outreach people were represented on any of the panels, because they do hold so much power and influence on the journalism that many lay people across the United States consume. Also, information on engaging with kind of the specific barriers that local TV reporters deal with. Mm-hmm. It's time and resource constraints. And I will say from my own experience, when I have kind of a base of knowledge about a topic, I can crank out a great local news package. When I'm having to report on something that I don't have any familiarity with and I've got a 5:30 live deadline, it's just not as good of a story, and I have to hit that 5:30 live deadline. So I think resources for local TV reporters that address their barriers specifically and give them a knowledge base to create really accessible reporting in an 8-hour shift would be super helpful and actionable and reach a lot of people. And then the third one, I think, is to engage with the strengths of local TV news reporters, which is often very character-forward reporting. Mm-hmm. That tends to be the strength. It's, perhaps there's context missing in typical local news reporting because of the content expectations and the timelines, but there's a lot of great characters, and it's the people who were there. You have to be there to do the reporting, and so I think that's a strength to access, like the humanity and the morality of the issue that could be tapped into.
Definitely, thank you. It's important to acknowledge the unique strengths and challenges of different mediums, and especially local TV, because of how important it is in the U.S. and elsewhere. We're focusing on that at CC now, so can you come find me? Yeah. Maya, or?
Hi, I'm Wolfgang Blau, Oxford Climate Journalism Network. Congratulations to a really fantastic gathering. One thing we're wrestling with is how to convey or how to train journalists more in the regulatory side of things, how to read corporate ESG reports and climate disclosures to produce better journalism, because the tendency of journalists is that we really have a great interest in politics, but less so in policy. But this is the great moment of regulation, and there's just fantastic stories to be found.
Definitely. Thank you. To the back.
Hi, Jason Spingarn-Koff from UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. I wanted to plus one the importance of documentary film and visual journalism. Also to add an item, how can we best reach conservatives? It's well known that there's a huge divide in people's beliefs about climate change based on their political affiliation, especially in the US. So what is impactful for conservatives in particular?
Yeah, what I'm hearing in all of this is kind of like a training and or education working group, which I think would involve, right, the major journalism schools, but also, you know, what AFP was talking about, what Covering Climate Now does, what we do in terms of trying to train a lot of journalists in all of these things. Yeah, in the back.
Hi, it's Danny Feingold from Capitol in Maine. I'd love to hear more about the critical importance of early accountability reporting on the most important climate-related decisions that are happening at the legislative, regulatory, and corporate level. There's a relatively small number of these decisions that have really far-reaching implications. I will say that Capitol Maine is in the beginning stages of developing a tool, a database that we envision sharing with news organizations across the country, and invite anyone to come find me and talk about it.
Hi, I'd like to hear more about the collective power of consumer behavior and how, as journalists, we can motivate the American public in the same way we did with COVID. Mark talked about that this morning, and I'd like to hear more about that because governments are hard to change, but people can change their behavior on a dime if they want to, if they're so motivated.
I'm going to take one over here.
Hi there, Zane Wolfang, the freelancer again. Thank you guys. I don't know if this is missing or not, so I won't say that it is, but we're at a university here. I'm sure these Columbia students are pretty well resourced. I think a lot of students at public schools, at state schools, at community colleges are not. I think it would be great to see student journalists, particularly of limited means and resources, included in conferences like this. And also, you guys can boo this one because we're all here and it is nice to meet everybody. In terms of like really taking action on climate, a lot of us flew here. A lot of us unwrapped individual vegetables from plastic at lunch today and then piled our boxes on the trash can. This conference could be hybrid or completely virtual and still be almost as effective in terms of the panel discussions, and I know a lot of people live in this like think PC world of like technocrats who are at work and then they were virtual and then they're hybrid and like, do we want to go back or not? But a lot of us weren't. A lot of us were essential workers. I was a janitor during the pandemic, cleaning floors at a pharmaceutical company. So I think, maybe like we all didn't need probably to fly to this metropolis to talk about cutting down emissions.
Hi, Executive Secretary Figueres said something pretty bold and maybe radical for journalists. She said, optimism is a responsibility. And I'd just like to know what journalists actually think about that, whether they think that that's true, and if they do agree with it, what are the actual implications for the job that we do?
Yeah. We'll keep taking comments, but that does bring us into the kind of last big section. Again, if it's something that I've already hit on, if it's something that struck you, if it's something that was missing, or the last one is, what questions do you have after today? So I'm opening it up. Again, you can, if you had a thought on something else, feel free. Maya?
Hi, thanks for taking my question or my comment. My name's Nora Hurdle. I'm a journalist in Minnesota, and I'm the founder of an organization called Project Optimist. We produce we produce solutions journalism and environmental reporting, and we're convening dialogues, hoping to bridge the divide that some of you have acknowledged already between people who don't really recognize that climate change is real or caused by humans. But I've been 2 years in the journey of launching an organization and learning how to be run a business and trying to integrate collaboration and community input and talking about visuals from the beginning, and all of these processes I've learned more so than when I was just a reporter in the newsroom. They take a lot of time and energy, and we don't have a lot of time. And I just want to recognize that we are living in that tension of trying to make big change quickly, change that is hard and emotionally draining. And we're making mistakes sometimes, and we're not doing it right sometimes. But I just want to recognize that we're all putting our mental health on the line, and that sometimes we just need to take a break and recuperate and have moments of joy. I was really glad to hear that come up, because we need that to be able to do this work, even though it's urgent.
Definitely, thank you. Back to Anna.
Hi, I'm Megan Parker from the Society of Environmental Journalists, and I have a question that we've been thinking about for a long time now, which is that how these stories are, there's so many of these stories, and there are going to be even more, particularly with the IRA, particularly with all of the regulation and happening in Europe and elsewhere. So many stories. We do not have enough environmental journalists to cover all of the stories that need to be covered. There is a huge upwelling of interest in this, and we're seeing a lot of new, younger folks coming into the field. How can we keep them in the field? How can they stay being environmental journalists for 10, 20, 30 years? Because that's what used to happen, and that went away, after the recession. What do we need to do to provide, what do people need in order to stay? And to be frank, that's about money. This is a very poorly paid profession. And that has to change. But none of us in here is probably going to influence, the hedge funds that are buying these newspaper chains and really, destroying the model of the industry. But how can we push for making this a sustainable career? And I think organizations like Covering Climate Now, like Uproot, like SEJ, that provide that community, that provide that peer-to-peer support for people, play a really important role. But how can we go beyond that to really start to affect the economics of being an environmental journalist?
Yeah, for sure. And I would want to add to the collaborations one. It's not just newsroom to newsroom or newsroom to community organization. It's collaboration within the newsroom, right? So yes, we don't have a ton. This is something I want to discuss. We don't have a ton of environmental journalists, and we might not have several in a newsroom, but we have a lot of other beat reporters that actually their beats are affected by climate. And so how do we collaborate beyond beats and between desks to cover?
I'm fairly new to the climate beat. Sorry. Hello. I'm Helena Salomon. I am a science reporter for the New York Amsterdam News, not too far away in Harlem. And I am fairly new to the climate beat. And I, as someone who also happens to teach journalism students, know how hungry we are for a chance to be taken up under someone's wing and learn, like the AP Collaborations editor brought up, ask about our needs, ask about, find ways to get the connections that we always hear about. Other journalists saying, like, this editor changed my career because they took me up and they showed me this, this, and that. I think in this space, I'm wondering what that looks like. Can we make more of that happen in addition to partnerships and all that? I'm wondering if there's something to learn from, something to learn from what the AP Collaborative editor mentioned, if we can scale that.
Thank you. Maya?
Yes, hi. Mary Lowe from ecori.org. In the course of reporting in Rhode Island about offshore wind industry and the fishing industry, I am just up against a fire hose of disinformation and half-truths and lies continuously on many angles, many areas of the topic. So I would love it if all of us here or somebody would help to compile a list of expert sources who we could turn to at a moment's notice and say, well, what about this chemical? What about this effluvia? What about rust? What about ratepayers, electricity sourcing? I need experts at my fingertips at a moment's notice when these disinformation is just coming and flying at me. And I think that's something we could all do for each other, because we need experts, and I'm personally asking for help. And I can offer some help too, because I know some people who know stuff. I just don't know enough of them. I don't know enough of them.
Hi, my name is Melissa DePento. I'm a professor at CUNY's Brooklyn College. So I've heard some comments here about sort of adjacent to education, but what I'm really thinking about is the students that I teach, the young students, are really like politically motivated, very into social justice and climate change. So I'm thinking about in a place where there's not many resources, as someone else mentioned, a lot of institutes of higher education just don't have these kinds of programs to teach students. How do we harness the power of all these students who want to do this kind of work and be able to provide them training that really prepares them to do this?
We're going to keep taking comments. And I just want to assure everyone, I know it might seem like, we're just throwing all these ideas out here, but look around the room, look at all of these flip charts with all of these notes that we are taking in and we are going to keep talking about tomorrow and beyond this conference. Anna.
I just wanted to comment that Climate Central has a very nice tool, and they provide experts that can help with several topics, as well as different other topics that can help any other journalists working on any type of climate or even environmental type of stories. So you could reach out to them, Climate Central.
Maya, and then we have several in the back corner.
Hi, I'm Tom Trinidad with Climate Exchange. I've spent the best part of like 2 years trying to fundraise for climate journalism. And I think while we all understand intuitively the value of why journalism is important, and there's a certain category of funders that will support journalism for journalism's sake, they're mainly tapped out. And so it's been an interesting journey of like trying to convince people who have got a lot of money to spend in climate tech and climate policy and climate finance that without investment in journalism, all of that other stuff is kind of not going to happen in time. So my question is like, how can we all collectively make a more persuasive case for the value of journalism in building a stronger social mandate for these kind of policies and technologies and finance that we need to see, and how can we bring more evidence to the table that journalism is kind of key in this ecosystem?
Go ahead, Karen.
I'm Twilight Greenaway from Civil Eats, and one of my big questions is, in addition to reaching folks who may be deniers and folks who may not have the education, I feel like there is a large portion of our readership who has just enough information to be really afraid, and they're turning away from this news. I speak to a lot of people in my personal life who tell me that, who admit that they just don't want to read this anymore. And one of my big questions right now, I spoke to someone who organizes faith leaders around climate recently, and she said, I'm really tired of the conversation around hope. I'd really like to know how we can start talking about courage. How can we have courage in this moment? And that, I feel like that's, for me, that's like that's leading my work right now, and I want to see courage appear more in these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. News avoidance beyond the climate issue is very real. I just came back here to take some because there was a bunch.
A couple things. The first one is the relationship between white urgency, especially in journalism, and how that's rooted in white supremacy and very much brought forth to communities of color when reporting about things like like climate change. So to keep that short. But the second is really, as someone who's been like consistently on the front lines, how to build trust between journalists and activists. I know that it's not always about protest activism, but there is a strong level of distrust when it comes to predominantly communities of color and marginalized communities with journalists in spaces where they don't feel like they're being kept safe. And also the relationship between like having an opinion in an article or, you know, the way that someone reports.
Thank you. We'll take just one more back here and then.
Yeah, I guess it's related to what was said. Hi, I'm Sonia Petrovic, Solutions Journalism Network. Not to get us in trouble, I guess, because it is related to this. I'm coming from a non-journalist perspective, but when I think about what I constantly hear in journalism spaces, since I've joined, like, this isn't advocacy, this isn't activism, like, who does that alienate? The professor who mentioned, from Brooklyn College, who mentioned students who really identify with that, does that push them away? And is it like a holdover from objective journalism when you say that? Because I feel like there's a privilege in saying that this isn't advocacy or this isn't advocacy or activism. When like, to me, that feels like it almost appeals to some climate deniers to say that, because and some people don't get that privilege in saying that it isn't that. Sorry, I'm just really nervous speaking in front of crowds. That's why my voice is warbling. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you. You know, we hear you. Yeah. It gets conflated, and what does that mean for audiences and for communities? Go ahead.
So I'm old enough to remember when the movement was the story. The civil rights movement was the story. The women's movement was the story. And I'm a little bit baffled about why the climate justice movement has not been more of a story. There are so many stories, local communities that are taking on, particularly fence line communities, environmental justice, climate justice communities that are taking on really big institutions very effectively. There are coalitions all across the country that are very actively moving policy, challenging the banks that are investing in fossil fuels. It's happening all over the country, all over the world. So I think a topic that would be really, really helpful is to talk about why there's not more coverage of that work and how there could be more coverage and how it could be more responsive to this huge movement that's grown up in the last 10 years. Second piece, somewhat related to that, several people have already mentioned this, is there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. I think we've seen how that's manifesting historically with companies like Exxon and other, some of the really big fossil fuel companies that have been paying to, putting a huge amount, investing a lot of money in putting the disinformation out there. What I've seen very little coverage of is how that's happening on the local and state level within the U.S. I know here in New York State, there are not big fossil fuel companies, but the utilities and the people who distribute heating oil and propane are funding campaigns that are holding back climate action at the state level. And there's almost no coverage of that at all. I've tried to get journalists interested in that, and it's a very, very tough fight. And I don't know whether that's at the level of reporters or whether that's at the level of editors, but it's played out here in New York State very concretely with efforts by statewide coalitions to move legislation that have been repeatedly blunted by very well-financed campaigns with AstroTurf organizations calling themselves New Yorkers for Affordable Energy or Smarter New York Energy, which puts out scare stories, gets people to call their legislators and say, don't let this happen. Anyway, I think those are two topics that are almost never given coverage, and I wonder if we could have some conversations tomorrow about why that's the case and what might change that.
All right, we have a time for about 3 more comments, but I want to remind you, you've seen some people coming up to the flip charts. There's still time to do that. You can do it while we're still discussing all of this. So please be involved that way if you don't get a microphone or if you don't want a microphone. Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, I'm Simon Franz. I'm a managing editor at the BBC. I had 2 points. One, to add to something that's been going around this. I totally endorse the idea that we need to support people more. We need to support people on the front lines. There are many other parts of the media industry, like war and politics, where there's beginning to get efforts. How do we build in resilience? How do we provide support, emotional support for people? Less so in this world. And what do we know from there? What are we learning from there? And how do we apply it to the people in this room and outside? The other thing I wanted to mention was there was a lot of talk at the beginning about awareness, understanding, and impact. We had a lot about awareness and understanding and less about impact. What does impact mean? What does action mean? How do we build that into the ways that we tell stories and understand how our audience feels? And then how do we use that information and data and keep building on those stories and keep building those narratives and scale that beyond not just climate coverage, but all the areas it touches?
Maya, in the back.
Hi, my name is George Openetta, Chief Meteorologist and Executive Weather Producer at CBS 2 here in New York. And one of the takeaways I got was I really loved the French presentation of the weather and climate. And as it scales things out, that's something I'm fighting every day. I produce graphics locally, and as it's tough to give the perspective, but I think a year is a nice visual, and it is about visuals. And what else stuck out was the fracking song. In such a room of intelligent people, there's something about the simplicity and childlike teachings to people who don't know things yet. So maybe it's a reminder to quell some of the arrogance and the overintelligence that we all have, because we are smart. You guys are smarter than me. You know what's going on around here, and not everyone does. And sometimes a childlike song or a big visual is really effective. And that's a big takeaway for me here today, for sure.
Thank you. Hi, Luke Herbert. I'm a comms director at Climate Group, and we run Climate Week NYC, or help run it. I think my question is, how do we think about who's in the room and versus coverage and bringing oxygen to who's not in the room? So this might be ironic for somebody who's helping run events around New York this week, but there's hundreds of organizations which we encourage to commit to drive climate action, and it's right that they're challenged, for if they're greenwashing, if they're delivering on the commitments, etc. That's absolutely right. But we also know there's hundreds or thousands of multinationals and other organizations who aren't in the room, who are just keeping quiet and out of the fray. And from a science-based point of view, often those organizations have got huge emissions that are not being addressed at the moment, and also have huge impacts on marginalized communities, developing countries, etc. as well. So how do we ensure that we've got the right balance of coverage and oxygen to where it's required? But that obviously ties with the resources points which we made earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, we did, in organizing this, we can't, in a day and a half, we can't get everyone, but one discussion we did have, which I think speaks to you, is, right, international finance desks should be covering climate, international business desks, right? Local journalists, which I was for a long time, I might not be covering those big banks, but the big media corporations and companies can, and so that kind of falls into the collaboration too. How do we mix local and international? National and international. All right, we have time for one more comment today. Go ahead, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank everyone for taking responsibility for my flower today. I feel like that was a great experiment in collective good, because I was stopped by at least 30 people to say, where's the flower? Why don't you have it? But segueing to that, I think I would like to acknowledge the comments made about AP's approach on collaborations. And I just want to highlight that it is a carefully orchestrated approach to collaboration, in that it is from the ground up. We are not limited to partnering with newsrooms. We also partner with networks of journalists. Currently, we're working with the Uproot Project, where we have worked with GRIST. Yes, you're in the room. And we're also working with student newspapers, because we firmly believe, and someone mentioned this, and I agree with you, that we need to build their portfolio before they get into struggling to get that internship. Through our collaborations, we provide that co-publication, that byline, that AP byline, that will be a game changer for them in the future. So we're not just looking at global South collaborations, we're also looking at U.S.-based collaborations that could expand coverage in, smaller communities, but also Native journalists. So thank you once again for the flower support, and good luck with the rest of our discussions.
Thank you, Sherelle. And thank you, everyone, for actively participating in the town hall and both sharing your insights and learnings and questions, and also deeply listening to everyone else's. I know it can be, for me, it can be hard to just be openly listening, because I can tend to be a fixer and want to start answering people's questions and start building towards some of these ideas, and we'll have ample time to do that tomorrow. So I just wanted to say a deep thank you for what we did today.
Yeah, I would echo that. And I think if you heard somebody mention something that you didn't understand, that you still have questions about, or that you might agree with, go find them, right? Again, when we think we've started, we've only just begun. And so this conversation continues into our evening, tomorrow, and beyond that. A little bit of logistics in the morning. We will take everything that we've seen here today, again, from the survey, from the panels, but Q&A, and especially from these flip charts. And we will be breaking in early or late morning into some working groups, both in this room and the world room, for you to continue the conversation with facilitators who will be taking notes. So when you show up in the morning, just be thinking about what came up today. I think we hit a lot of these. There's a few more we're probably going to add based on this town hall. Be thinking about which conversation you want to have. You won't have to stay in one. You can jump around. But if there's something that particularly you want to contribute to, just be thinking about it. We'll talk more about it in the morning, and you can move to those groups when it's time. But again, we're still going to be participating and being active in this dialogue as we move through the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Angela and Mekdela. Could we give them a round of applause? That was terrific. I really look forward to seeing how this plays out in these working groups tomorrow. Everyone can take a breath. We have one more bit of business to do, which is my favorite part of the day, I think. And that is that we want to take a moment to recognize some of our colleagues who were announced this week as the winners of the 2023 Covering Climate Now Journalism Awards. Let's take a look.
Meet the journalists doing the best reporting on the biggest story of our time. While the world battles record heat, fires, drought, and floods, this year's Covering Climate Now award winners help people understand what's happening and how to fix it. The shocking delay and denial by governments and companies. The injustice of drought-starved children in Somalia. The urgency in Pakistan, a third of the country underwater.
We are standing here fighting against that system which is making a profit out of crisis.
The activists and frontline communities demanding change. Citizens blocking a company from leveling a village for the coal beneath it. Lawyers suing fossil fuel companies for their decades of disinformation. An island state prime minister demanding the biggest polluters pay for climate damages. These award winners arm the public with knowledge, hold bad actors to account, and light a path to survival. For their incredible journalism, for their invaluable contributions, we salute the winners of the 2023 Covering Climate Now Journalism Awards.
Could we have the award winners who are in the room come up here on stage and join us for just a minute? This is what you get, which is awesome. Let me just give you a bit of background. For the past 3 years, Covering Climate Now has been honoring some of the best reporting on the climate story worldwide. This year we received, and this is amazing, we received nearly 1,100 entries from 6 continents. And our panel of judges selected 76 finalists. Of those, we identified 29 winners, many of whom are here tonight. So out of 1,100 entries, finalists represented here with us today. So what I'm going to do is, not everybody could be with us, but as you can see, a lot of our winners are with us. By the way, when you see them tonight, if you go tonight to the reception, please congratulate them, as we will. So if you're here, I'm going to mention everybody, but if you're here, raise your hand so we'll know that you're here, and we can and please applaud. So we have the winners here include 2 of our journalists of the year, Monica Bell and Amy Westerveld. Both of whom you heard from earlier. The 3rd journalist of the year, Damien Carrington of The Guardian, couldn't be with us. Also, 2 of the 6 special honor winners, including Alec Loon, who reported on the devastating drought in Somalia for Vice News, along with cameraman Daniel Vergara. So, what Alec is holding up is there was another producer on that story, Mohammed Ibrahim Osman, who was recently arrested for his reporting on police corruption and is still in custody. So please, let's honor him right now. They were honored for Best Justice Story. Amanda Burrell, reporting for Al Jazeera English on international activists who have taken their governments to court. Her story was honored as Best Solution Story. Also with us are winners from all over the world for categories in audio, writing, multimedia, and video, including Best Documentary. The team who produced that film, The Dystopia of Seoul, are with us from Korea, reporting from New York this week. The team includes Kang Min-na, Sung Yoon-ju, and An Si-hee. Mark Albert won for a series of short-form videos on Hearst Television that reported on local concerns nationwide. Tracy Wolf from ABC News is a winner for her long radio piece on conflict. Long is not an adjective, it's a category. For her long radio piece on conflict among neighbors over solar farms in Ohio. Tracy? And Carolyn Beeler reported on massive flooding in Pakistan for The World. We also have Joe Lauder, winner for Who's Gonna Save Us, an inspiring podcast presented by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. That was about people who are making life-altering decisions to help stop climate change. Winners in the writing categories include Julie Cart for a profoundly moving series published by Cal Matters on the trauma that affects firefighters in California. Also, Erica Smith, who asked tough questions in a Los Angeles Times series about homes being rebuilt only to reburn. And all the way from Brooklyn comes Aline Brown, who co-wrote Climate and Punishment, a deeply researched examination in The Intercept. Finally, it's my special pleasure to introduce 3 young journalists with a deep commitment to climate coverage. Time Magazine's Alejandro de la Garza, one of 2 honored as Emerging Journalist of the Year, and Cameron Oglesby, recently graduated from Duke, and Kate Seelig, who is still at Stanford, are 2 Student Journalists of the Year. Again, let's give all of these winners one more very large round of applause. You can see their work on the Covering Climate Now website. And again, if you see them tonight, please congratulate them. Thank you so much.